Okay, 13.2, slide 107 to presumably 164. So the second of the progressive presidents is Taft. He was the handpicked successor of Teddy, but his policies, while still progressive, were more in line with the traditional Republican Party, and that did not make Teddy Roosevelt happy. We'll see that in our future. At 325 pounds, Taft often found himself stuck in the White House bathtub. His advisors sometimes helped pull him out. 325 pounds, he was our largest president. And he had a huge bathtub. What? They had to make him a bathtub so he wouldn't get stuck. Incredible. Taft establishes the tradition of throwing out the first pitch on April 14th, 1910. I think Trump still hasn't done it. If Trump does not do it, he will be the first one since Taft to not actually throw out the first pitch in a baseball game. I don't think he did it. He was not as progressive as Teddy was, and that makes Teddy upset. He was friendly, pleasantly plump, passive, but very sensitive to criticism. Keep in mind, in the newspapers, that's all that the newspapers do is criticize, criticize, criticize. In 4 years, Taft brought 90 suits against trusts, more than twice as many as Teddy. More than twice as many. I think Teddy was like 42 or something like that. In 1911, the Supreme Court ordered the dissolution of the Standard Oil Company, that it was too big, that it was a trust and a monopoly, and it was too big. Standard Oil. We still have Standard Oil, so we know how that worked. Taft tried to break apart J.P. Morgan's U.S. Steel. Remember, J.P. Morgan bought Carnegie Steel and then created the biggest steel company there was, which is U.S. Steel, angering Teddy, who thought it was too important to the economy. If you remember correctly, before we talked about Teddy said that there were good trusts and bad trusts, but he's the one that decided. So he decided that J.P. Morgan's steel trust, U.S. Steel, was a good trust, and so he's mad at Taft for trying to break it up. Taft splits the Republican Party. Okay, the rift between Teddy and Taft about Taft not being progressive enough, not being liberal enough, even though he busted 90 trusts, served as a microcosm of the split between traditional and progressive elements of the Republican Party. Remember, they're both Republicans. A division that weakened the GOP heading into the election of 1912. So Teddy's going to run as the leader of the Progressive Party, which is going to be called the Bull Moose Party. And Taft is still the leader of the Republican or the GOP Party. But then as a result, they split the vote. Teddy gets more of the vote, and then Taft gets some of the vote. But as a result, Wilson got more than both of them. Had they had the two votes combined, they would have easily won and still would have had a Republican president. But instead, Wilson is going to easily win because Teddy and Taft split the vote from the Republicans. Secretary of the Interior Ballinger opened lands in Wyoming, Montana, Alaska to corporate mining. Pinchot criticized the decision and Taft fired him. That's why it makes Teddy so mad, is Teddy is the one that put Pinchot in that position, and then Taft fires him, and it makes Teddy infuriated and makes Teddy decide he's going to run for office. Pinchot's firing led progressives to question Taft's conservative views, and Teddy was furious. Democrats made big gains in the House during that election as a result. The Republican Party split between the progressives and the old guard that Taft supported, and because they split the vote, then the Democrat Woodrow Wilson won. Interestingly, you should know that Woodrow Wilson wins the election. He doesn't take us to the World War I, which starts in 1914. Again, this is the election of 1912. So the presidency starts in 1913, in January of 1913. But, well, I guess it would still be March of 1913. But as a result of that, Woodrow Wilson doesn't take us to war till 1917. Had Teddy been president, we would have gone to war right away. Remember, he loves the imperialism. He goes in the Spanish-American War to fight. We're going to find about that out in the next PowerPoint. Oh, La Follette is famous, Wisconsin National Progressive Republican League. He's a famous progressive at the time. A lot of people were angry because they didn't think that there should be a third term because George Washington didn't do 3 terms, and he left after 2 terms, so people believed that you should not do 3 terms. It wasn't a law, but it was the idea of it. that we don't want a king or an emperor, and so there shouldn't be a third term, but Teddy ran for a third term anyway. Teddy showed interest in running for the president again, but the GOP still supported Taft. Keep the whistle blowing, because he's running for re-election. Okay, he wants high import tariffs. That's terrible for farmers, if you remember correctly. Put limitations on female and child labor, very progressive policy. Workmen's compensation laws, very progressive policy. It's very good for workers. Against initiative, referendum, and recall, that's not progressive. Against bad trusts, he says any trusts are bad. Teddy was the one that distinguished between a good trust and a bad trust. Creation of a federal trade commission and stay on the gold standard. That's great for rich people, but that's not a progressive idea. And conservation of natural resources because they are finite. We have only a certain amount of natural resources. Once we destroy them, they are gone forever. Abandoned by the GOP, Teddy became candidate for the Progressive Party, pushing La Follette aside, which made La Follette very angry. And it's going to be called the Bull Moose Party. The election of 1912 was Teddy versus Taft versus whoever the Democratic nominated, which would be Wilson. There he is, Woodrow Wilson. Okay, so he's the third of the progressive presidents. The election of 1912 saw 4 strong candidates for president, all influenced by progressivism to some degree, but the split in the GOP allowed Woodrow Wilson to emerge victorious. With the GOP split, the Democrats thought they had a chance in 1912, and they did. Woodrow Wilson, Democrats chose Woodrow Wilson when William Jennings Bryan swung his support to Wilson. Remember, William Jennings Bryan ran for Democratic president 3 times. He was a professor in New Jersey. Wilson, a strict progressive and former president of Princeton and governor of New Jersey. He's also one that took black people out of the administration and out of the White House. He was very racist. Wilson sympathized with the South. Good speaker, honest, very religious, intelligent, a cold person, intolerant of stupidity. He's a professor, very idealistic. When it says he sympathized with the South, he's talking about the white people in the South. That's who he sympathized with. His policy is called the New Freedom. Remember that Teddy's was called the Square Deal. Teddy's is the Square Deal. His is called the New Freedom. Wilson's domestic agenda was New Freedom, a bunch of domestic reforms. New Freedom saw Wilson favoring small businesses over big businesses, those captains of industry, and he wants to break up all trusts, good and bad trusts. That makes him a progressive. New Freedom was not very socially progressive. It did not support women, blacks, or the working class. Again, I told you he's going to take all the black people out of the White House when he's president. And so it's not progressive. He doesn't give women suffrage, not right away. It takes a long time for that to happen, and they protest against him in front of the White House. Government control of monopolies, those are the trusts, that they should be controlled by the government. Trusts in general are bad, all trusts. Tariff reduction, because that's bad for farmers, so that's a progressive policy. They believe there should be only one-term president. That's it. You're president for one term, and that's it. Direct election of senators, that's going to happen. That's going to be the 17th Amendment. It's going to be a secret ballot. And the direct election of senators. Create a Department of Labor so that they can have people that go and make sure that laborers have a fair deal. Strengthen the Sherman Antitrust Act. That's going to be the Clayton Antitrust Act because he's also a trust buster. He did not support women's suffrage or civil rights, which would be liberal perspective. And he was opposed to a central bank. That is absolutely a progressive idea because central banks benefit the big corporations. That's not a real picture. He was on a horse, but then they made it look like he was on a moose. Taft was the GOP candidate, and Teddy, saying he felt as strong as a bull moose, became the candidate of the Progressive or Bull Moose Party. They referred to it as the Bull Moose Party because he said that. And then anything with the big glasses equals Teddy. Teddy and Taft, former friends, tore each other apart in the campaign, making it an easy road for Wilson. New Nationalism was Teddy's domestic plan. This is the second time around. The first time it was called the Square Deal. Now it's called New Nationalism. Control bad trusts but provide freedom for good ones to operate. So opposite of Wilson. Wilson says get rid of all trusts, that they are not good for the workers over here. That's way more progressive than Teddy. Teddy wanted women's suffrage, social welfare programs, minimum wage laws, and socialistic social insurance like health care, universal health care. So those are all very, very, very progressive policies, all of that. And he supported women. Okay, so women's suffrage, a graduated income tax, the poor pay less than the rich people do, inheritance tax for the rich, lower tariffs, limits on campaign spending, lower tariffs are good for farmers. Limits on campaign spending means all those rich corporations can't give lots of money to the candidates. Currency reform based on gold or silver. Laws to raise the minimum wage, that's very progressive. Social insurance, that's very progressive, making sure that there's unemployment or something that happens if you lose your job or retirement. Abolition of child labor and workmen's compensation. That means you had your arm cut off, you should be compensated for that, and they should put you in the hospital, make sure that you're well. During Teddy's campaign in Milwaukee, he was shot in the chest, but it hit his campaign speech in his breast pocket, and he finished his speech afterwards anyway. The bullet stayed lodged in his body for the rest of his life. I don't know whether you fully understand that I've just been shot, but it takes more than that to kill a bull moose. Famous, 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 famous. And there's his speech that the bullet went through. That's the bullet, I guess. I don't know what that is. Wilson won easily because Teddy and Taft split the vote. He did not get a majority of the popular vote, but he didn't have to because the other two split the vote. Therefore, he doesn't have a mandate for his policies, though. Everybody's saying, oh, you don't deserve to put in the policies that you want. You didn't even get half the vote. Taft and Teddy all added together more votes than Wilson, so they could have won if they had just been one vote, if they had decided who was going to run, but they didn't. They had two parties. Eugene v. Debs, Eugene v. Debs, Eugene v. Debs, socialism. He got nearly 1 million votes in 1912. It's pretty many. The issue is socialism versus capitalism. I am for socialism because I am for humanity, meaning the laborers, all of the workers, the lion's share of the human beings are workers, not rich big businessmen. It is to abolish this monstrous system and the misery and crime which flow from it, capitalism, in a direful and threatening stream that the Socialist Party was organized, and now makes it appeal to the intelligence and conscience of the people. Social reorganization is the imperative demand of this worldwide revolutionary movement. Socialism/communism. Eugene v. Debs. This is what they believe in. Government ownership of railroads and utilities, a graduated income tax, no tariffs, remember for farmers, 8-hour workday, better housing for everybody, government inspection of factories to make sure they're safe for the workers and for people that are going to get the products from those, and women's suffrage, pro-women. Those are the different days for the Socialist Party, different years, how big it got. The seats of opportunity open up for Wilson and the Democrats. Okay, so he was the only president to join the Supreme Court after the presidency or before that, for that matter. Taft. Taft was in the Supreme Court. He was later appointed the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in 1921. It's pretty cool. Wilson dismantles the triple wall of privilege. That's the rich corporations and monopolies and trusts. There can be no equality of opportunity, the first essential of justice in the body politic. If men and women and children be not shielded from the consequences of great industrial and social processes, which they cannot alter, control, or singly cope with. Woodrow Wilson's progressive agenda sought to address income inequality in America by further dismantling trusts, lowering the tariff, and restructuring the nation's banking system. That's the triple wall. Dismantling trusts, lowering the tariff, and restructuring the nation's banking system that favors the rich. Wilson was perhaps the most well-educated president earning a PhD and writing several books on American history and politics. The use of a university is to make young gentlemen as unlike their fathers as possible, meaning educated. Oh, and he's ranked number 9th. Teddy was ranked number 4. So he's also one of the most famous. Teddy's 4. The Democratic Party took control of the Senate for the first time in 20 years. Remember, the Democrats were mostly the people from the Deep South who hadn't won an election after the Civil War. Wilson wanted to tackle the triple wall of privilege, the tariff, the banks, and the trusts. Wilson believed the tariff, banks, and trusts allowed the rich to remain rich and prevented social mobility in America. Social mobility is what you guys believe in, that if you get a good education, that if you work hard, that you can become rich, that you can create your own future. And at this time, social mobility didn't exist. Everybody was poor and they stayed poor. In my generation, my father's generation, all of us, we had social mobility. Do better than your parents did. You guys and the people in the 21st century, my son, are the first ones that may not actually do better than your parents did because of the income inequality, again, that exists now with Zuckerbergs and Bezos and Gates and everybody. Huge income inequality again. Just like then, 130 years ago. In 1913, the Underwood Tariff Act reduced tariffs and enacted a graduated income tax. The poor people pay less and the rich people pay more. And lesser tariff is good for farmers. The 16th Amendment created a progressive income tax. Wilson had Congress investigate the banking system and determined that the banks had too much power, and the system required more government regulation. I think you remember that J.P. Morgan and August Belmont Jr. loaned the United States government money, that they were so rich that they lent money to the United States government. So banks are way too powerful, banks and bankers. In June 1913, Wilson spoke to Congress asking for sweeping reforms of the banking system. The Federal Reserve Act created Federal Reserve Board, overseeing a nationwide system of 12 regional Federal Reserve banks. I think you know this. This is where they actually produce money. They actually make dollars in the Federal Reserve banks. Probably one of the most important things you have to know is that Taft also wants to get rid of all trusts and monopolies, and you have to know that he created the Federal Reserve Bank. That system, the Federal Reserve System, was created by Wilson. I think I just said the wrong person. Wilson. Oh, and it tells you on the dollars, it tells you in here where the dollar was made. Okay, interest rates in recent history. Really, really high in the 1980s. The Federal Reserve System gave the government the ability to regulate the economy and to quickly make adjustments to avoid recessions and inflations. And even today, people still, presidents and their administrations still adjust interest rates to be able to have more money in the system or less. In 1914, the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission Act, created a presidentially appointed position to investigate the activities of the trusts. The FTC still exists today, Federal Trade Commission. The goal of the FTC was to stop unfair trade practices like unlawful competition, false advertising, saying something is what it is and it's not at all that, mislabeling, adulteration, and bribery. Adulteration is that you're saying that you're selling this pure and it's actually got like 80% of something else in it. The Clayton Antitrust Act, 1914, lengthened the Sherman Antitrust Act's list of objectionable practices by trusts, and they enforced it. They enforced it. So they added more things to it, and it was finally enforced. So the Clayton Antitrust Act improves on the Sherman Antitrust Act, and it's enforced against the trusts. That's a big thing. That's very big. It legalized strikes and peaceful picketing by labor union members. It allows labor unions to go on strike just for unjust practices or unsafe working conditions or not enough money or for an 8-hour day. It also exempted labor unions from being called trusts because they used the Sherman Antitrust Act to go against labor unions, which is exactly opposite, antithetical to what it was supposed to be used for. But big businesses have big, high-powered attorneys that used it against labor unions. So it now says you can't use these antitrust acts against labor unions. Reform rarely takes place during a national crisis. We start World War I. 1914 and 1918, we don't enter until 1917, which officially ends the progressive age, because now we are uber focused on World War I. Bye, have a good day.